I would like to welcome Dr. Sanjay Srivastava, sir, for this webinar focused on loss and damage. Sanjay, sir, welcome to you.
Yeah, welcome. Namaskar.
Thank you so much.
Namaste to all of you, Professor Vishnu Shah, and all your team.
We highly appreciate for accepting our request to share your highly deep and invaluable knowledge to our community. We really appreciate it. Just to give a brief background, NENCID is a Nepal chapter of the international ICID, Nepal chapter of the ICID, and this is led by primarily by Department of Water Resources and Irrigation. We have structures. You might be aware about this Indian seed kind of a Nepal chapter or different chapters of the ICID.
Yeah.
We are running top programs since a long ago. We had continued for 25 series once in a month. Then we take a break for some time and again resume after some time with one series in every 2 months. So we are happy to welcome you on the 20th episode. This session is about an hour long with 25 to 30 minutes for presentation followed by question and answer. To talk today's topics is tapping loss and damage fund for climate change adaptation in irrigation and agriculture sector in Nepal. And we are very pleased to have a very esteemed speaker with us, Dr. Sanjay Srivastava. He is a very humble human being I know. He is presently the Chief of Disaster Risk Reduction at UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. In short, we call it SCAP. Dr. Srivastava leads and guides SCAP's analytical policy research on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation that fits into the UN international meetings, negotiation, and agreements. Dr. Srivastava received second SCAP Innovation Award in 2022 for leading the team and is the recipient of ISRO's Team Excellence Award in 2008 to 9. He has more than 150 publications to his credit. He is the lead author of the UNESCAP's Asia Pacific Disaster Report, WMO's State of Climate in Asia, and State of Climate Southwest Pacific. So this is very, very brief information about Dr. Srivastava. He has a wealth of knowledge. We are very privileged to welcome you all in the session, which will be delivered as a keynote by Dr. Srivastava. Sir, the floor is yours. You can take up to 30 minutes for your talk.
Yeah. Professor Vishnu Shah, Tukaramji, and all colleagues, I'm really grateful for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about loss and damage fund and how it can be tapped, particularly for irrigation and agriculture sector of Nepal. So thank you very much. If I let me try if I could able to I think
do you have access to share?
Yeah, not yet. I think
Jigyasha Ji, could you please assign him as host? I think you are host now. You should be able to do it.
Right.
In case there are any issues, I also have a backup copy.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Vishnu. So let me come to what I'm going to talk to you. I thought this loss and damage fund is a very different track of funding. So I thought I will let you know what this overall understanding of loss and damage is related to funding. Second, this funding is under UNFCCC. So what is the institutional mechanisms for this fund to go through? Then how can we translate loss and damage fund into the action, and particularly for Nepal context? And then the agenda of loss and damage in Nepal's climate commitment, it's already there. The next step is how to take it forward. And then I have brought some point for your just for to set the tone specific to irrigation and agriculture. What are the potential strategic actions under the fund? And then finally, the COP28, which is November this year, and this time this is in Asia, Azerbaijan So there are some very important development related to this fund, which I think we expect.
Sir, we can only see the list of files, not the PowerPoint. Maybe there are some issues in sharing. We can see the list of files, your folder, not the PowerPoint.
Oh, is it? Okay. Uh, let me uh, let me try again. Can you see this, Dr. Vishnu?
No, cannot. Maybe
Yeah.
you may maybe close and try again with the share.
Yeah. I think that should be. That should I try now? Huh. Just give me a minute. Is it okay now, Dr.
No,
Vishnu?
no, it's
Still
not
not,
okay.
sir. I don't know what's the issue.
Okay. Screen sharing.
Yeah, now it's gone. Maybe you can reshare the
Yeah,
entire
I
screen.
will.
Maybe you should send this file to the organizer who can put you in the thing in the list.
I already have a copy. Shall I share from here, sir?
Yeah,
Do
Vishnu.
that.
Now you see, is it?
Yes,
Yes, now is okay.
now
Yeah.
it's perfect.
Okay, fine.
Please go ahead,
Thank
sir.
Yeah. Thank you. So I was talking about the presentation, the overall outline of this presentation, which I think important before we come to tapping the loss and damage fund. One is understanding about it. Second is understanding of the process, particularly the UNFCCC process for funding. Then how we can translate loss and damage fund into the action. What are the mechanisms that is available? And then my fourth point today presentation is the loss and damage fund. There is already a climate agenda in Nepal. It's time now to trigger and take it forward. Then what are the more specific programs under the Irrigation and Agriculture Ministry, which could be supported by this fund? And finally, I think this looks to be my old slide. Uh, just a second. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I think so. Finally, on COP29 upcoming, what are the opportunities which we can look forward to get the loss and damage fund? So if I start from my first slide, that is on why it is so different, why the whole world was waiting for it. Because there are certain nuances which we need to understand about loss and damage fund. The first point which I would like to highlight is the perception that climate change impacts are potential loss and damage, and this can be dealt with mitigation and adaptation is not realistic. It took a long time for the world to understand. So second point is understanding that loss and damage is additional mechanisms to address climate change along with adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and humanitarian action is partially true. Then the third, this loss and damage fund refers to the impact of the climate beyond the limit of adaptation. And in a certain vulnerable context of a vulnerable country, it's very difficult to mitigate what has gone wrong. So the impacts of the climate change under certain vulnerability context cannot be mitigated through adaptation and DRR. Then the point number 4, which is the most, I think, something which excited most from the developing countries quite a bit was this is the loss and damage, how to address the harm done to vulnerable countries, vulnerable ecosystem. an expression of climate justice in the era of climate emergency. So this point number 4 is the most important point, that it is reflected in form of a climate justice. This slide is just to set the scene that the loss and damage has something what we call on you can see from your side, Dr. Professor Vishnu.
Yes, it is. Yeah, we can see it. You are in 1.2, right?
Yeah, one
Yeah,
point.
we can see it.
Okay, Dr. Vishnu, thank you. So there is one what is called avoided loss, which you can of course avoid with adaptation and DRR. Second part is unavoided loss, means there is a disaster impact, which because country doesn't have that kind of capacity to mitigate that or address that, so that is what is called unavoided loss. Many country falls in that category. You have a risk, climate impact, but you don't have capacity or institutions to address this. Then comes to third, which is unavoidable loss and damage. This is the crux of the matter. These are those impact which cannot be, which goes beyond adaptation, mitigations, and this is where the climate justice becomes so important. The UNFCCC discourse is you can avert disaster to some extent with mitigation action like the emission target. If you could able to reduce, you can minimize loss and damage to some extent with adaptation, but there are some residual risk which cannot be mitigated, which cannot be adapted. So this loss and damage is all about this residual risk, unmitigated risk. Uh, if I take this further, this was the most important development in loss and damage overall discourse. I think for the first time in 2011, 2013, Vanuatu, a Pacific tiny island country, took this agenda of loss and damage because of the sea level rise in Pacific island countries. And since then, they started building a global advocacy or campaign on a small island developing country, sea level rise, then came to mountainous country on glaciers retreat. Then the many came with different kind of sector where the loss is becoming irreversible. So the momentum finally got the global acceptance at COP, that is the Paris Agreement, what we call COP21. And for the first time, it was recognized and agreed upon by the global community all over the world that the importance of averting, minimizing, and addressing the loss and damage associated with the adverse effect of the climate change. Because many of the developed countries were not in a positions to come to this agreement. This loss and damage is because of the developed country and some of their activities in the historical activities in the past. But at 2015 Paris Agreement, there was broad global agreement on loss and damage. It was a big victory. And followed by that came to a mechanisms that was what is called Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. And this is something which started taking loss and damage agenda forward through Warsaw International WIM Mechanism for Loss and Damage. Then party recognized that loss and damage is something which has to be addressed, taken care of, and through the cooperation among the countries. So that was a process which took longer time. Then I would like to flag your attention on this point, loss and damage continuum in UNFCCC. The process is you have to take 3 steps which qualifies under the loss and damage fund. One is avert the disaster. In UNFCCC, the avert the disaster means you cut down carbon emission, what they call the limit 1.5. And then the understanding is it will avert many of the disasters. So here, avert disaster is directly linked with mitigations. Then comes to minimize. minimize the loss and damage. This comes to through adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So you can minimize the impact. Then comes to address. You cannot minimize the loss and damage beyond a point. So when disaster hit and there are loss and damage quite substantially, then you use what we call recovery, reconstruction, post-disaster funds, which comes under the humanitarian domain. So avert, minimize, and address. I think these are the three terms you will always hear from UNFCCC negotiations. Of course, there is no strict boundary. There are quite a bit of overlap, but UNFCCC negotiation use these three terms and categorize most of their activities and funding mechanisms under avert, minimize, and address. This point is something to understand about the UNFCCC process related to loss and damage. The first part is the policy part. The policy part of the whole COP mechanism stays how to fund, how to support loss and damage. And this comes from a mechanism, what I was highlighting, Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. So this gives this provides a policy framework for loss and damage. Then comes to the technical part of the loss and damage. This is what is called San Diego Network for Loss and Damage. Very recently in 2022-23 only, there is a secretariat now of San Diego Network for Loss and Damage. I will come little later on this part. And then comes to the finance. This finance comes from the COP, Loss and Damage Fund. And this is the agreement among the countries. So we have policy, we have a technical part of it, and then comes to the finance. So these three are very, very interlinked in loss and damage funding. I just want to invite your attention on Warsaw mechanism. That's the policy part. The important part is, of course, it started with 2014, its self-executive committee. But after 2015, when climate change, Paris Agreement recognized the loss and damage fund should paid attention to, that time the issues were slightly different. It was on focus on displacement, particularly mostly in the Pacific Island countries context in desert of Africa. Then some area were included under the slow onset disasters, non-economic losses. So in 2016, the overall loss and damage whole activity or spectrum were setting up. Came to 2019, it was a very important year in terms of establishing San Diego network to catalyze demand-driven technical assistance to the country. Country can get demand-driven technical assistance under this funding mechanism. In 2020, the important landmark is loss and damage were associated with Green Climate Fund. The country, for example, Nepal, if Nepal receives Green Climate Fund, and if it prioritizes loss and damage, particularly what we call avert, minimize, address, then it will attract a bigger share of Green Climate Fund, because into 2020, it was very well recognized that Green Climate Fund could be used for loss and damage at a country level. 2022, the famous Glasgow Dialogue, COP26, there was a mechanism established for funding activity, and that mechanism finally became part of the policy mechanism. I will come later. And that policy mechanism is what is called Warsaw mechanism, which we discussed. The next point is the San Diego network. This was a development last year, 2023. San Diego network first time has got a secretariat, UNDRR and UN Ops. These are the two agencies which are providing the secretariat support to San Diego network. It has a advisory board. Many member countries are part of it, and then what it does quite a bit is it takes developing country, particularly the developing country which are climate point of view most vulnerable, and then play a catalytic role. What is the needs of the developing country to address loss and damage? So they do a demand and supply analysis. Then San Diego Network, what it does, it create some kind of a coordination among the agencies and the fund. And then this all three put together, they decide the quantum of the money or fund which could be given under the loss and damage fund. It yet to start. It will start now after the COP29. And this is the window of opportunity which are driven by Warsaw mechanism from policy, San Diego Network as a technical body, and funding comes under the loss and damage fund. So this also create a kind of dialogue if there are some very serious loss and damage issues. Many times it happens in Pacific Island country context or glaciers country context. They organize the dialogue at COP, which creates a demand, also creates a technical assistance from the respective country, and that goes to the funding. So this is the mechanism which helps a country to build a narrative for getting loss and damage fund. The another point which I thought I should highlight is this: San Diego is going to be, as of now, it's not operationalized. Secretariat, everything is put in place, but from COP29 onwards, this will become operational, and this provides a wonderful opportunity. As I shared with you, it will implement the function of Warsaw International Mechanism, which is the policy part. Then it will catalyze the demand. How it will catalyze the demand is it will provide technical assistance. For example, Irrigation Department of Government of Nepal, it needs technical assistance. It will facilitate. It will provide you means the technical assistance from what we call OBNE, organization, bodies, network, and experts. So all it will bring together in Nepal context, provide the contributions, the funds in the developing country, climate vulnerable countries. So this is where they will use money. And then comes to facilitate action. If there are some implementation gap where capacity development becomes very key for the line ministry, it facilitate actions in a way that it should help in averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. And finally, it facilitates also collaboration, catalyzing many coherence and synergy among not only loss and damage fund, but many other fund. For example, I said Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund. So all this facilitation with loss and damage fund, it does. So yeah. So now I am coming to loss and damage fund, what it all about. So you heard Warsaw International Mechanism, that was policy, San Diego Network, that was technical, but this is the fund that was established in 2022. It was in Egypt last year, 2023, in Dubai, UAE. The governing, this fund was really agreed among the all countries. So all the mechanisms, all whatever you heard, there was all discussions stepping up of Warsaw International Mechanism, San Diego Network, but there was fund exclusive for loss and damage that was missing. Last year in UAE, this missing gap, means missing link, somehow was able to address. That was the biggest achievement of COP in the recent times. And that was the governing instrument adopted in 2023. The very first day of the COP, this announcement was made. Then the most important part is the governance instruments, because countries were quite vocal that this should not be like Green Climate Fund or the World Bank. It has to be loss and damage fund in the principle of the climate justice. So it should not be like a soft loan or long-term loan. It's a the aid. Then fund to provide support, economic and non-economic. It should not be only economic. It should also be non-economic losses of the country. We will come little later on non-economic part of it. The scope is quite a bit, which starts from emergency, sea level rise, displacement, reallocation, migration, climate information and data, which is very important for technical capacity of the country, climate resilient reconstruction and recovery. You see entire gamut of loss and damage fund, how to avert, minimize, and address covered under the scope. The fund to complement, this is the point I would like to highlight. This fund is essentially to complement other funding mechanism. In other funding mechanism, there is no clause of loss and damage. Here it is loss and damage, very well targeted for it. So all funding put together provides a big sum of money for a country to take action, particularly the climate related actions. So this action could be from short term to medium term to the long term. So this will be a very important resources for the country to take climate action agenda forward. The recent development that happened last month in July, the recent development, which is now going to be in COP final decision. So the recent development was, which is very contextual, particularly for Nepal. The Loss and Development Fund, the agreement is to enable grant-based support. There's no more loan, or there's no any donor, what is called the direct or indirect interventions. It's a enable grant-based support to developing countries towards balancing this important point. Many countries are under a lot of burden, debt. So country under huge amount of debt, and then climate vulnerability. The Loss and Damage Fund is to maintain a dynamic equilibrium between the fiscal burden and climate vulnerability. That's an important point. Many countries, particularly in South Asia, if you look at the countries, the debt level are very high, and then climate vulnerability. So Loss and Damage Fund will be the ideal for those countries who are struggling with the debt. Then this fund is, of course, both slow onset disaster as well as extreme event. And you saw the variety of area, rapid response to long-term recovery. So all this is going to address. There are some small grants of the fund which is available to ensure community-based disaster management, support to the indigenous community, indigenous people of the hills, mountains, and for their livelihood. So this is all what is going to COP in November. So this is the latest, most recent agreement on Loss and Damage Fund. This graph is just to make you a little more clearer that if the fund comes at national framework of the financing disaster risk or climate adaptation, how it looks like. You see in the national framework, including in Nepal, the first curve, this one, we have some budget line or some resources for emergency response whenever there is a contingency at the country level. Then we have some money of our own on adaptation finance, some comes from the donor, and then we have budget for the finance. We also have budget or donor finance on disaster impact, ex ante, ex post. This is post-disaster recovery and reconstruction. But what was not there, which is coming now here? You see, this is the loss and damage finance. It was not there before. Now with this COP this year, it will become operational. And this will help to address unavoidable and partly avoidable disaster losses, which I was talking about. So this will be the contribution from the fund. So if you look at the spectrum of the funding mechanism that exists today in a country, from its own budget or coming from the multilateral bank or donors, bilateral donors, most of the money were going to adaptation finance, emergency finance, ex ante, ex post, post-disaster recovery. But this is exclusively coming to address what is called unavoidable loss and damage. This is a very important contribution, and I will come back to you little more about this in Nepal context. So this is something, a big development that this was a funding window that gap was there in the past. Now it's going to be addressed. In the similar context, I would like to bring to your attention there are already few more funding mechanism, but not to the extent of loss and damage fund that was available for the climate vulnerable country. For example, the CVF Climate Vulnerability Forum of around 20 countries. Nepal is one part of this. Then Vulnerable 20. Nepal is again comes under CVF Climate Vulnerable Forum and Vulnerable 20 category. Under this, they are entitled to get lot of funding support, mostly on emergency response, and to some extent on the adaptation. Then there is a global shield against climate risk, that is G7 and Vulnerable 20 partnership. I think it's led by Germany. They also provide, but most of this funding comes post-disaster, particularly recovery, reconstruction, emergency response. This is the three which is going to be most important from now onwards, that is loss and damage fund. So those disaster loss and damage which were not mitigated before, this fund will be targeted for those country and those what is called avert, minimize, and address disaster losses. So all funding put together, if you look at Nepal context, will give opportunity to take up many of the work which was not taken, maybe because of lack of understanding and also lack of the financial resources exclusively dedicated for unmitigated disaster risk. My next slide, this from now onwards, I'm coming, what we can take it to Nepal context. The window for getting loss and damage fund comes from basically UN FCCC commitment for all the countries, including Nepal. They have committed to take the Paris Agreement forward. Now, the best that country support to the Paris Agreement is they develop their own NDC, nationally determined contribution. Nepal has shown. So NDC sets many of the priority, particularly on climate actions. And this is particularly loss and damage. Many countries had already put this under the NDC, including Nepal, but there was no funding available. So some of the activity which were listed in NDC, there was no budget available to address this. Now it's a time to take this loss and damage forward. But for this, it's very, very important. And this is the main purpose of, I think, our dialogue today is define this loss and damage in Nepal context. And especially in a sector context like irrigation and agriculture. So include loss and damage in NDC, it's already there in Nepal. Define loss and damage in national context. This is what we need to do. Then integrate current and projected loss and damage. This is purely science, and Pulchowk Campus think tank group can work very well on this. How much is the loss and damage in present estimation? What could be the projected with the warming? It's a different from other climate related impact, this loss and damage. So these are the things which we need to do as a think tank, the most prestigious technical organization in the country that will enable government to capitalize on loss and damage fund. So this is what is to be done within the country, your NDC, your commitment to loss and damage, and then loss and damage in a country context has to be very clear, very focused, and that's what I have listed in this. Globally, the important part, of course, last year was a global stock taking. It's a big development, means which country contributing to loss and damage is now globally known, stock taking. Suppose UAE, United Arab Emirates, they contributed I think millions of the dollar. So it becomes part of their contribution to loss and damage, not climate finance, loss and damage exclusively. So it is captured under the global stock taking, and the whole, the sense of justice, what is called, you are paying towards loss and damage. So, it becomes like a global framework, a stock taking of the progress. There is a enhanced transparency framework, the money which comes from the developed country to support loss and damage, which country, which project, what activity. So this is the enhanced transparency framework that was put in place. And now San Diego network, which we were talking about, this is the channel to get the money to the country. So climate-induced loss and damage under UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement has to be dealt with climate action, that is Sustainable Development Goal 13, and which get reflected in NDC. Then disaster risk reduction, that is the Sendai framework, which also becomes part of NDC, and humanitarian response. So all put together, you have to position in such a way that the country becomes entitled for loss and damage fund. The coming very specific to Nepal. This is based on my research for this presentation. Nepal NDC, we went through, it has a very clear, I must thank the think tank of Nepal. In the NDC, one of the main highlight was by 2025, a national strategy and action plan for loss and damage associated with climate change impacts will be devised. I think it's already there in NDC. You may be knowing better about the status, but this is an opportunity to develop a strategy and action plan for the government on loss and damage. Then in the NDC document, there are many, which is like multi-hazard monitoring, early warning system by 2030, 2025, climate sensitive disease surveillance through the health, and then the climate risk assessment mechanism in the WASH, climate finance strategy by 2022. It's already done in Nepal context. The important part along with NDC is NAP, National Adaptation Plan, 2021 to 2050. If you look at National Adaptation Plan, it incorporates adaptation and resilience milestones to be achieved in short term, medium term, and long term. So NDC and NAP of Nepal together gives a wonderful insight on a national strategy and action plan for loss and damage. And this is a time to act upon this, take it forward. So my next slide is to tell you a few snapshot on Nepal National Adaptation Plan. When you look at National Adaptation Plan, there are adaptation and resilience element in almost all sectors. For example, protecting lives and livelihoods of the people. This is part of DRR. This is where all early warning systems comes in. Then agriculture and food security. Adaptation is a big item under agriculture and food security of the government of Nepal. Even under the forest biodiversity, adaptation is already ingrained into it. Industry, human health, water, energy, and tourism. So if you look at Nepal NAP, this provide adaptation is across the sector, but when you are going to address loss and damage, it simply cannot be by just one sector. It has to transition from a sector to system thinking in order to address unavoidable and partly unavoidable loss. So that's basically the pathways for addressing loss and damage. Bring a synergy across the sector, create a roadmap for loss and damage, which is already there in the NAP. Now, how to tap loss and damage in Nepal context? I would like to suggest that we must tap this to make the effective use of finance, which could address both adaptation, resilience, loss and damage, the most important part of it. Then through technology and human resources, this is where the university academia becomes so important. So the building of the tapping is to address three: finance, technology, and human resources, which are important for taking forward loss and damage agenda in Nepal, already reflected in NDC and NAP. Now, when you go to the specific to the irrigation and what agriculture sector, we have to build a very specific narrative to the COP and in the government. The vulnerability of agriculture systems, irrigation system, it has to be very specific on this, on loss and damage. So if the money is given to you for loss and from loss and damage fund globally, how it will help to reduce vulnerability from loss and damage perspective. That's the important point which I'm trying to highlight again and again. Address adaptation plus loss and damage. Synergy with SDG and Sendai. Keep focus on loss and damage. And all that, the key enabler is the data knowledge sharing within the country, global, within the country. You need a very knowledge intensive institutional system which can able to address loss and damage issues. So irreversible and computing loss and damage in Nepal context, particularly compounding disaster risk, cascading risk becoming very, very critical in nowadays in recent times. So you have to build a narrative from cascading
Dr.
disaster.
Srivastava, it is possible to speed up a bit because we are only 10, 11 minutes left for the entire time. So we
Yeah.
lost a bit in the beginning. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So this is just to tell you from our side, what we have done from our analysis, we have created a narrative for Nepal. In Nepal, when you look at the annualized average loss, the annualized average loss of Nepal is quite high, but the most of the losses are coming from the floods. So this is where the agriculture and irrigation system becomes so important. So you have to flag this as a disaster where the losses are going to be more than 90% in the country. Now, this is just to tell you that this is our analysis based on the data. I have this presentation with you. If you look at Nepal economy, it's $29.3 billion, out of which the annualized average loss due to all disaster in Nepal is $1 billion, which is quite high. But you can save out of 1 billion, 207 to 310 million by preventive measures like early warning system, because the cost benefit of early warning system ranges from 20 to 60%. So it is possible to what is called minimize the loss and damage through the adaptation. So while building the narrative, this has to be built. Now, the few slides more on suggestions, particularly focus on agriculture sector. When you are creating an evidence-based narrative for loss and damage in Nepal context, particularly for agriculture, is first point is the climate risk profile of the country, which is already available. It has to be built in terms of loss and damage. Then climate risk profile of the slow onset disaster. Apart from glacier, it's land degradation, desertification also becoming quite serious. So build your climate risk profile from extreme event, slow onset disaster, and then take the vulnerability of the people, which is the hunger, marginalized group. So this fourth is come to the sector, because most of these vulnerable people depend on the agriculture sector. And this is how the critical loss and damage element to it. So you can build a very strong narrative, highlight agriculture, and also the community which depends on agriculture are at the front end of the loss and damage. So these are all the elements if we build into a narrative, submit to loss and damage fund, provide, then it will be a very important opportunity. I think the one before the last slide is tapping the fund to support agriculture and irrigation service. On financing side, there are a lot of range of estimate of climate change financing in Nepal. It's already exists, but there is no explicit link with loss and damage. So that's the time you can take it forward, link the financing needs from a loss and damage perspective. And for that, 4 steps which are key evidence-based research, what loss and damage means for the national agriculture and irrigation system, and identify relevant domains, policy responses. Number two, comprehensive climate risk management, DRR adaptation. Number three, invest in data, research, innovation. That's the university. And number four, strengthen and implement emergency response to put community back on their feet. So all four put together gives a wonderful narrative to tap loss and damage fund for agriculture and the irrigation sector of Nepal. My last is the COP29. The biggest agenda for COP29 this year is enable action, which reflects the critical role of finance and adapt to climate change and address loss and damage. So that's the opportunity to capitalize on. So I think this is my last slide. And thank you very much for this opportunity. Please do let me know if you have any specific queries on this presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Srivastava. Really, really insightful presentation. It clearly reflects how hard you have worked for setting the agenda for Nepal. We entire NENCID community, irrigation and water resource community will really appreciate your contribution in this endeavor. So just to take one takeaway from here before opening a discussion, is very clear in his presentation that climate change impact is not equivalent to loss and damage. Mitigation is equivalent to averting loss and damage. Adaptation is about minimizing that. And loss and damage is beyond that. That is addressing residual risks. So there is the confusion here. You have clearly mentioned it. Also, loss and damage under UNFCCC has the three components. For policy, there is a Warsaw International Mechanism. For technical, there is a Santiago Network. And for finance, that is only the one component, that is the loss and damage fund and funding arrangements. And climate change, climate finance is different than loss and damage fund. It's a very, very clear insight we mentioned. And also you helped us to shape how the agenda of Nepal could be, considering our national policy documents. It's really crystal clear. Thank you so much. There's one question in the chat box that is the access to loss and damage fund and administrative process or needs certain level of diplomacy? How do they prioritize the different proposals from different countries? If you have any insight on that, that will be great.
Yeah, Professor Vishnu, I'm so happy to hear this question from Baral Saab.
Yes.
I think diplomacy has played its role. The loss and damage fund going to be now in place is all the victory of diplomacy of the many countries of the world. This is a time to take this forward. So here what will work is how strong narrative you are building to get your loss and damage fund. The process, if I understand correctly, is if, for example, if you submit a proposal under the loss and damage fund, understanding all its dynamics, then it will go through a process through Warsaw mechanisms and the Santiago network, where it will be expert level evaluation. They will call you to present your case. Your document is there, your presentation is there. So I hope this should be objective, because as I mentioned to you, there is a global stock taking mechanism, there is a transparency framework. So the reason for putting all this thing together is that it should be fairer. It's an element of justice, so it must be fairer, right?
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions from anyone in the group? I haven't seen any additional question in the chat box. It was very crystal for me. It was very crystal clear, from fundamentals to our provisions to the actions that Nepal should take, and also the potential agenda Nepal should highlight in the COP. It was very crystal clear. Any other questions, if anyone has, or any comments anyone has? We can take one or two more comments before we conclude at 5:30 p.m. Okay, there is one. Krishna Chandrasa has raised hand. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Namaste, Sabalai.
Namaste, sir.
Yeah, I guess I should speak in English, I guess.
Yes, sir. You are muted, sir. Krishna, sir, you are muted. Sir, we cannot hear you. You are muted. I don't know what has been the issue. We cannot hear him.
Okay.
Yes, sir, we can hear now. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. There are two groups of countries, what I understand. One group is paying money as compensation for loss and damage related to climate and so forth. Whereas the other group is on the recipient side. They are receivers. Nepal has been on the receiving side so far. But do you think we should continue doing that, or do we go on the other side as well, in the other group as well?
Actually, so this V20, which I referred those country or climate vulnerable forum, they were classified based on the climate risk, means what we call the loss and damage perspective. So as of now, Nepal, as you rightly said, is in a recipient side. But once you build your capacity, you manage the risk very efficiently, you will go to the other side, and that's the future.
Yeah, but I mean, what is the goal? To remain on the recipient side, or balance it out, or be on the giving side?
Yeah, the present goal, which I think I highlighted in one of my presentation, is a country like Nepal has huge climate risk. Also, the debt, the country with the debt, with the lot of financial, what is called the lack of fiscal space to address many of the development challenges. So the vulnerable group has been identified in today's context, but they will keep updating. If the country, like for example, Nepal is on the process of graduating from least developed country to the middle income country. So in that case, the category will change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you, sir. So since it's already 5:30, so in the interest of time, it's very interesting. I think we will have some other opportunities also in the future to interact, because more interact with you, more strengthened we feel with the knowledge. That's really great. So without further ado, let's make an announcement about the next episode before we conclude. Let me share the screen. Sorry, where it is. Okay. Our next event of the NENCID is scheduled on Sunday, which is a part of annual general meeting. So we are having a technical session on addressing field level challenges in irrigation projects implementation and service delivery, starting from 2 p.m. Nepal time, and will continue afterwards. We'll have a primer presentation from Bhadra Dhami, which is cadre at the Department of Water Resources and Irrigation with extensive field level experiences. He will be giving a primer presentation, followed by 4 panelists. Akur Prasad Sharma, President of SCAP, that is the Association of Consulting Architects and Engineers, DG of DWRI, Mr. Sanjay Baral, and also the professor at the university, Professor Dr. Narendraban Sakya, and also Arya Sarath Gautam as a panelist, and I will be moderating this session. So we request all of you to manage the time to see this interesting session. With this announcement, we almost come to the end of the session, and I would like to request DDG Dr. Santosh Kaini from DWRI to conclude with a short closing remark.
Thank you, Vishnu sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Vishnu sir. First of all, I would like to thank Sanjay sir for the comprehensive presentation on tapping loss and damage fund for climate change adaptation in irrigation and agriculture sector in Nepal. It has provided us with an overview of pathways for tapping the loss and damage funds. As you know, Nepal is insignificantly responsible for the climate change contribution, contributing only around 0.03% of the global greenhouse gas emission. However, we know the multiple sectors, including water supply, irrigation, energy, and the entire ecosystem are often the most vulnerable to their impacts. So such webinars play a significant role in developing a common understanding among ourselves, like for Nepalese professionals. for channelizing the climate funds, the loss and damage funds, actually in Nepalese context. I believe today's presentation has provided new insights for us for tapping the climate funds, the loss and damage funds, especially in the Nepalese context. So I hope we will certainly be benefited from this presentation today. Many thanks to all the participants for their active participation. And again, many thanks to Sanjay sir, and we hope to have you as a presenter in our coming sessions as well in future. Thank you all. Thank you, Vishnu sir, and all. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, Sanjay sir. And also, this session has been recorded, so we will disseminate it to all our professionals in the network so that they will get benefited from this talk, even if they could not join today. Thank you, sir. See you again in future.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Namaste.